Hi all, welcome to video number 10, The Problem with Tongues. The gift of tongues has probably caused more chaos and bitterness and division in the church over the last 150 odd years than any other gift. Since tongues was restored to the church in a public way after the basically 1906 Charles Parham and his mob, and then the Azusa Street revival. You got to remember, these guys were pioneers, and pioneers often don't get things completely right. They're working with what they've got. They're trying to develop and go with it and learn about it. And one of the problems at the time, and continues to be a problem in certain theological circles, is the insistence on linking the gift of tongues with what Pentecostals call the second baptism, or the baptism of the Holy Spirit. Now, to an Orthodox evangelical, you receive the Holy Spirit when you receive Jesus. I mean, that's what's going on. You're created body, soul, and spirit. And the problem with the unsaved is their spirit is completely cut off from communion, if you like, with God. So when you become saved, born again, your spirit is renewed and reconnected. So you have access at that point to everything that God has made available to you. Whether you can walk in that is really the big issue. And a lot of the problem there is, of course, if you don't know that you can do it or that you're allowed to do it, you don't pursue it. And this has been a huge problem. So I want to clear up some of the basic issues that people have. And one of the things we see over and over in ministering to people and helping them get going in tongues is the biggest hurdle is that we are, as adults, we are not used to noises coming out our mouth that our brains don't understand. We think it's gibberish, we think it's rubbish, and we're not, and that's the biggest hurdle to overcome. The idea that the Holy Spirit is actually connecting direct to your tongue. And Paul says, he who speaks in tongues speaks mysteries. So when you are praying in tongues or speaking in tongues or worshipping in tongues, or however you want to view it, you're actually speaking out mysteries direct from the Holy Spirit that your brain doesn't understand or know. Now, I did hear one of the prophetic guys saying, but the angels assigned to you understand what's coming out your mouth, and that's one of the ways they get their instructions. Don't know, but it's an interesting way to think about it. Okay, so what is clear through church history is that nobody seriously moved in the power of God who didn't pray in tongues. And there's evidences that go right back to some of the Middle Ages monks, St. Francis and others. Many of them had ecstatic experiences, all sorts of things that we would call spiritual gifts things these days. But back then they would use different terminology. So the other thing, and it's a point that Raff makes, and he teaches on this, and he says, in every listing of spiritual gifts in the Bible, tongues is always right at the bottom. And the reason for that is that tongues is the entry level. It's the only gift that you can switch on and switch off yourself. Right? Prophecy, yeah, you can sort of position yourself and start praying for someone and everything, but what then comes out is coming from the inspiration of the Holy Spirit. Tongues, you can simply just open your mouth and la 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 la. And this is where, like I said, at the beginning, the problem, the mental problem comes in. People are like, oh, is that valid? Is that tongues, or am I simply making it up? And one of the things the Lord told me 5 to 10 years ago, I can't remember exactly when, but he said, son, just tell them to obey the Old Testament. And like any good Orthodox evangelical, I'm like, Lord, where was tongues in the Old Testament? It doesn't sort of show up until Corinthians. Yeah, it does. Make a joyful noise unto the Lord. That's it. See, that takes away all this mental anguish about is it valid, because it doesn't matter. Make a joyful noise to the Lord. La 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 la. That's all I got. Lord, let this be my tongue until I get something more. I'm going with this. And what a lot of people find is once they get over that hurdle, they just start like and different sounds and syllables and possibly even words. And of course, most of us can recognize the structure of language. One of the things I've found helpful is teaching people to sing in tongues. So, you're in a worship service and people, there's a particular chord pattern, the song. I just encourage them to start, instead of singing the words on the screen, just start singing tongues, singing sounds. Make a joyful noise to the Lord. And that often breaks the ice, because the biggest problem is here. Right? Stop your stinking thinking. That's who was it who said that? I think it was Paul Cain. Right? We've got to get our heads out of the way and let the Holy Spirit start to direct. And this is where tongues is so important. Raf's been pushing a book for years, and I don't have a hard copy to flash up. I've got a downloaded copy because you can actually download it for free off the web now. It's called The Walk of the Spirit, The Walk of Power by Dave Roberson. And I would recommend that you all download it because it's really, really good, and it deals with all of these sorts of issues, what tongues is. It goes through it in great depth. Okay, The Walk of the Spirit, The Walk of Power by Dave Roberson. I remember when I was back at uni in the 80s, and as a good evangelical Anglican, we'd just discovered God was still doing stuff, and tongues was very new to me. And I remember I would be wandering between lectures at uni, and I'd be just under my breath praying in tongues, and I would literally go from divine encounter to divine encounter to divine encounter, opportunities to witness, to share with people. And because I didn't really cognitively understand, but I was just releasing the Holy Spirit to work in me and work through me and prepare me for what he was then able to drop me into. So it's extremely important. And Raf says that tongues is the gift that sets the place for all the others. And I've observed that. The more you speak in tongues, the more you tend to operate in all of the other 9 spiritual, well, the other 8 spiritual gifts and so on. So it's certainly beneficial. Paul said, I speak in tongues more than any of you. Okay, and then another issue is what's going on when you pray in tongues. And I remember Raf once said, people think they're praying for this, but what's coming out of their mouth biblically is, the mysteries. And I get what he's saying, but Paul actually says, I think it's 1 Corinthians 14 somewhere, he says, how do I do that? Well, I pray with my tongue and I pray with my mind. And I've always understood that God can hear our thoughts. Satan can't, God can. And I might be praying in tongues and I'll have thoughts coming through about this person or that person. And in my mind, I'm praying this, that, and the other while my mouth is praying I don't know what. And it doesn't really matter because I'm making a joyful noise to the Lord. And the Lord is far bigger than my limited ability to express things in a correct theological way. So the simplest way, I think, to grow in this area is simply thank the Lord for everything he's given you and start making a joyful noise to the Lord. And pick something your brain's not going to, or you want to get your brain out of the way, because your brain doesn't know the mysteries that the Holy Spirit does. That's the whole point. Have a good day.